When we first learned that the Danganronpa team, of all people, was making a strategy RPG of all genres, yeah, I was a little bit skeptical. But then they dropped a 5-hour-long demo on Steam, and, well, I mean, just look at this, man. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and if you enjoy what I do, including covering upcoming turn-based strategy RPGs, especially ones from devs that you would not have ever expected to make a turn-based strategy RPG, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel, as well as consideration of checking out my YouTube memberships and my Patreon would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So the 100-line Last Defense Academy is very close to releasing, and as mentioned, it dropped a hefty, meaty, girthy demo on us via Steam in the last few days at time of recording, and upon spending my time with that demo, I gotta say, I was pretty damn impressed with what we had in store. So today, we're going to be talking about what exactly is entailed within that demo in terms of story, art, character writing, mechanics, strategy RPG feel, etc., etc. And I'm going to give my overall thoughts about it as well after we give a general overview and a little bit of a deep dive into some of the things that we have since learned. Of course, I did cover this game when it first got revealed, but we haven't really had a lot of news about it since then, so there's a lot of new information available here for me and for all of you. I think it's going to be an interesting time for all of us. As always, you'll be able to find some timestamps in the description and in the progress bar down at the bottom of the video, so if there's anything in particular that you'd like to learn about, you can jump to those sections of the video. With that said, what is the 100-line Last Defense Academy? The 100-line is a new universe, as far as we're able to tell, separate from the Danganronpa universe, but made by the same team. You can absolutely expect a very similar art style to Danganronpa, as well as a lot of the visual novel elements that were a mainstay of that series here in the 100-line. However, hidden behind that is a surprisingly involved strategy RPG from what we've seen in this demo. Dropping on April 23rd, 2025 for, interestingly, just the Nintendo Switch and PC, there actually looks like there's a lot to look forward to here, and the current demo that's available on Steam should be fairly indicative of what the full game is going to have on offer, seeing as how we're only a couple of months out from the full release. So, what is the story here? Compared to Danganronpa, where you are an average everyman who gets sucked into a school environment where the students are expected to murder each other for fun in some sort of killing game, you are an average, everyday, common student who is going about his average, everyday life only to get sucked into a school environment where you're expected to band together with your classmates to fight off a never-ending horde of alien monstrosities, explicitly not each other. Big difference here, I know. The whole idea is that humanity is currently existing in these underground residential centers. Think of things like Neon Genesis Evangelion with Tokyo 3 that can go underground, but with people living underground all the time, and without any conscious knowledge of any potential monster invasions until suddenly everything goes to hell and monsters invade. In an effort to protect your childhood friend, you are approached by a very strange looking little mascot, Monokuma has nothing on this guy, and told to stab yourself in the heart with a very strange blood red knife to unlock certain powers to be able to fight off these alien invaders. You can choose to do so or not, which leads to a funny little encounter, and you become kind of a god. Like, this feels very Persona in a way where you are able to, shoot yourself in the head or summon a demonic force or what have you to gain power and get a fancy new form with edgy new abilities and go absolutely whoop ass. Now, what makes things interesting here is that while yes, you are whisked away to a mysterious academy alongside other high school age students to do the bidding of the weird mascot of the game, this is a much more explicit, we are fighting fighting back against apocalyptic forces who are trying to destroy humanity scenario, as opposed to a we are setting children against each other in a game for the entertainment of the masses while the world burns down around them scenario, at least from what we've seen thus far. You learn that the Academy is in fact on the surface world where you can see the stars and the destroyed remnants of humanity around you, and you are the last bastion of defense against these invading monstrous forces to protect the underground residential center that you all supposedly came from, although there is some questioning about that we'll get to in a minute. Some of the students, your main character included, are more than ready to fight, while others are like literally just teenagers and be like, absolutely not, you kidnapped us and won't tell us what's going on and won't feed us properly until we choose to fight. This is coercion, I'm not gonna fight, which like, yeah, fair enough. However, as time goes on and things get more and more dire, various different students will find different reasons why they should fight, even if it's not for the directly stated reasons that our weird little brain robot mascot tells us, and over time, you will unlock the entire party and the entire playable cast. Along the way, I imagine you're going to be learning a whole lot more about why the world is in the state that it is, the potential existence of multiple residential centers that all of your different playable characters have been drawn from across the board, thanks to some hints about things that definitely don't seem to be the case for our main character and his residential center that drove the lives of other characters and made them rather, shall we say, eccentric in the way that Danganronpa characters tend to be. Over the course of the game, we will progress through 100 days of either school-based activities and interactions with our fellow characters, or direct combat against all these monstrous entities while we power up our abilities and overall get stronger. As someone who's never played the Danganronpa games but have seen other people play them, either close friends or creators online, I have a lot more interest in this plot and this world than I did in those games. A lot of the Danganronpa games always, to me, felt like they were more just like, look at this wacky scenario that we can put these characters in so we can lead to strange, interesting mysteries and all sorts of quirky, silly nonsense with a veneer of murder on it. Whereas here, we still have a little bit of that going on, but you have a much more direct, humanity is in peril, people who should not be forced to fight are being forced to fight to defend it, and there's an overarching feeling of conspiracy behind it that reminds me a lot more of things like the Nier series than the Danganronpa games in particular. Combine that with the fact that a lot of the writing seems to be a lot more mature, the characters are older, and we don't have stylistic ways to avoid directly depicting blood like in Danganronpa, where it was like kind of pink and purple and it's like, oh, it's like goop. No, like here people bleed, and blood is in fact a very major important facet of the game's story and mechanics. So it feels like a more serious environment and story overall, which I appreciate. Speaking of blood, combat mechanics, and the like, let's get into a little bit of discussion about some mechanics here, shall we? The most important thing to keep in mind from a gameplay standpoint is that unlike your standard Final Fantasy tactics and Fire Emblems and the like, while you do have a player phase turn, not every character has their own distinct turn and actions that they can take separate from each other. Instead, your entire team has a pool of action points that they can utilize, with you potentially being able to pour all of your AP into one character for the entire turn and leave the rest of your team doing literally nothing if you so choose. Now, that's not advised based on mechanics that we'll talk about in a second here, but it is a very interesting way to go about kind of breaking up that multi-member team player phase, enemy phase, combat system that a lot of turn-based strategy games are almost stereotypically known for at this point. It's also important to note that unlike a lot of these other strategy titles, you do not have any sort of a focus on permadeath in the 100 line, specifically because sacrificing characters and getting reduced HP is actually a very important aspect of your power in this game. As your characters lose HP, they will get access to certain extremely powerful abilities that hit in a huge area and deal tons of damage, but which also cause them to die in the process of using them. In turn, this makes all the rest of your party stronger and gives you more resources with which to use your various different abilities, so you kind of wind up in these scenarios where later on in battles, you actually want to be able to sacrifice your pieces on the board to clear out large swathes of enemies and make the rest of your character stronger. However, you also have to walk that knife's edge of not sacrificing too many characters too early and finding yourself in a position where you just don't have the manpower available to deal with whatever threats you're currently facing. This makes for a very high-risk, high-reward combat system that I've not really seen in a lot of strategy titles, at least in recent memory, and it made things very refreshing and gave a surprising amount of depth to battles as you move from turn to turn. Combine this with the fact that you very often have a very small team facing off against massive hordes of enemies, as well as a lot of abilities that have a very large area of effect, and you will very quickly realize that battles in the 100 line are very dynamic and very explosive, both for yourself and for the enemy, which very much leans into that idea of character sacrifice. Now, of course, you might be wondering, well, if I can just have one character use all of my action points for a turn, why would I not just dump all of my resources, both combat resources and upgrade resources, which do also exist, into one overpowered character and make them insanely busted to sweep the game for me, right? Think about like playing a Pokemon game and having your starter get all the levels and all the powerful TMs, HMs, whatever, and just becoming a super boss that can sweep the game for you, right? Well, the 100 line addresses that in a very interesting way, wherein each turn, the first action that you take with a character will cause that character to become fatigued, meaning that any subsequent action they take, they will only be able to move one space before they execute their action. This will massively cripple your ability to move around the battlefield, and given how many different enemies and hordes you're going to be facing, and how wide sweeping major area of effect attacks you have, you're really going to feel limited when you suddenly can't move into a position to maximize those big AoE attacks on a major enemy horde. So you're still encouraged to have a number of different allies and be smart about where you move them with their first big initial turn to get the maximum effect out of everyone for a player phase. Of course, there are ways around this, and that's part of where the mechanics start to get very interesting, but from a general sense, yes, you are still encouraged to utilize your entire team and be smart about your deployment, where you're moving characters, etc., etc. Now, something that I absolutely love about the way 100 line is managing its overall combat system is that it is directly rewarding you for those big, explosive character sacrifice moments. Not only do you get the maximum amount of damage and the biggest area of effect from using these types of attacks, but you also get a big boost to your voltage gauge, which we'll talk about here in a second, as well as your post-battle rewards. You literally get bonuses the more characters you've had blow themselves up to deal damage to the enemy by the end of the battle, so long as you clear said battle. So ideally, you pretty much always want to be ending a fight with one character left standing, and the rest of your team having gone out in a major blaze of glory to destroy the enemy. This is even more impressive when you consider the fact that, as mentioned, you actually get extra voltage and extra AP when characters blow themselves up, so the whole rest of your party is going to be able to fight even harder to make up for the absence of that ally. Now, of course, that won't last very long, so if you start doing this too early, you're not going to wind up having the resources you need by the end of the fight to be able to survive, but it is really cool to see that your characters actually get more amped up and fight even harder once people start going up in flames. So how do these big attacks work? Well, that's where we have to talk about voltage and low HP. First off, voltage is a shared mechanic that I outlined in my initial video discussing the 100 line, wherein every action that you take, whether it be movement or an attack or a character blowing themselves up, will get you a certain amount of voltage on the meter. Once you get to 100%, you can start utilizing big, powerful special attacks or buffs for your characters that will last either for the entire battle or have one singular explosive effect on said battle. Every character has a big special ability that they can utilize, wherein they'll either hit a huge area of effect or buff their allies, heal themselves, etc., etc. Or you can choose to actually buff all of their stats using their Hemo Anima, something we'll talk about here in a second with a more in-depth discussion of the plot, to give them extra damage on their attacks, extra voltage generation, etc., etc. This voltage system combined with the AP system tells me that we're going to be highly encouraged to be very careful about what teams we select for what battles and how we use them, how we give them upgrades, etc., to really lean into how we can have our characters supporting each other and get the maximum amount of combat resources that we can for any given turn and any given phase of a fight. And considering that every fight that you encounter for the most part has multiple different waves to it, you're really going to want to be able to pay attention to how many resources you can build up early to make for explosive turns later when the most amount of enemies and or bosses are on the battlefield. This is, of course, before we even get to those self-sacrifice attacks that tend to have an even bigger area of effect, even more damage, but then, of course, remove the character from the battlefield, but only once they've dropped below half HP. So, as you're really getting into dire straits, you're getting flooded by enemies more than you can potentially take out with your voltage attacks or your regular attacks. Characters start taking damage, the objectives you're trying to defend start taking damage. Now it seems like a great opportunity to blow someone up and clear out a big section of the map, right? Most of these self-sacrifice attacks seem like they're just souped up versions of the voltage attacks the characters can use, but what's important to note is they don't use your voltage meter or any other combat resource other than your character's, continued existence on the board. So you can have big turns where you can just do a bunch of massive attacks and then still get voltage for your other characters to utilize without crippling the rest of your team overly much. Now, I made big use of these voltage attacks and self-sacrifice attacks early on in the demo, as I didn't have a lot of different attacks available for my party, except for one character who is mysteriously stronger than everyone else for story reasons. We'll talk about that in a moment. But as you are able to upgrade your characters, upgrade their abilities and their weapons, and get new abilities unlocked, I imagine that you'll be able to rely on your standard moment-to-moment actions more and more as you progress into the story, and really save these big voltage attacks and sacrifice attacks for the times that you really need them to clear things out, which I do really enjoy. It's always nice to see your team's neutral game expand and make it so that your choice of when to use these big explosive attacks matters even more, because you can survive for longer without them, right? To be able to unlock these different abilities, you will use different ability points and battle points and things, different resources that you can find from completing missions, exploring the world, etc., etc., by going to the different facilities in the school that you will be able to explore to upgrade the characters that you want to upgrade and make your team stronger overall. Fairly standard stuff for a strategy RPG, and while the 100 line maybe approaches it in a slightly different way compared to a lot of other games, if you're familiar with the genre, you should feel right at home with these upgrade systems. So with an overview of the combat mechanics out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the plot and writing, art style and aesthetic, cutscenes, voice acting, the school exploration system, the world map exploration system, etc., etc. As mentioned, your character finds himself in a sort of pseudo high school environment with a cast of very quirky, kind of odd characters who are being forcibly recruited into this war for the sake of humanity's survival. Unlike the Danganronpa series as a whole, from what I've seen of it, this leads to a much stronger sense of camaraderie and togetherness, even if characters do wind up butting heads a lot very initially, with everyone banding together against the forces that be that are making them fight, or trying to make them fight, in this scenario that they were not prepared for. Every character that was recruited for this war and becomes part of the party was able to defend themselves from these invading monsters, literally just called invaders, during the initial attack on their residential center. Some did so more successfully, more enthusiastically than others. There's certainly different types of characters that are more equipped or more willing to fight than others, but overall, everyone in the cast proved that they were able to defend themselves for one reason or another. Whether that came in the vein of just outright wanton bloodshed in terms of our biker gangster or our murderous emo chick, or someone who's fighting for the defense of another, such as our main character, or the obsessively loving twin brother of a twin sister, or you just survived by running away like this little guy who was just trying to protect his dog. Everyone was able to survive for one reason or another and prove that they're potentially a viable soldier in this war against these invaders. From what we've seen with the demo, a lot of the early plot centers around the fact that some of these characters are far less willing to fight than others when they're not directly thrust into a life or death scenario, and would like to know a lot more about what's happening in the story and in their world before they are willing to pick up a blade. The conflict comes in when you find out from your ruling overlords and your weird little mascot character that unless everyone agrees to fight and take up the blade, they won't be told. No one will be told exactly what's happening, why this facade of normalcy that everyone's been living under has been shattered, and what it is that these invaders want. All you know is that apparently if you don't defend this school, humanity will be doomed as the invaders get their hands on quote-unquote something important that exists within the depths of the school. So of course, this drives a lot of conflict between the characters who are more willing to fight either because they just don't mind fighting or because they want answers, as opposed to the other characters who are far more willing to just sit on their heels and let other people fight because they don't want to. Now, of course, given the nature of the game and the fact that each of these are a playable character, it's not too surprising to imagine that by the end of the game, we will be able to use all these characters and we will know more about what's happening in the story. But at least as far as the demo is concerned, it does create a very interesting point of contention as you see who is going to be willing to fight and who is not. As far as the character writing itself is concerned, I have to say I was initially very worried about how characters would be portrayed in the 100 line. I've always been a little off-put by the Danganronpa games in terms of just how one-note a lot of the characters could be. Like, you would have the sporty girl, or the weird guy, or the chef, or the gamer, or the strong dude, or the strong chick, or whatever. And that was kind of the depth of their character. Like, you'd get a little bit more into what their background was and what their worldview was, etc. But like, they had a character design, it was very telling about what their overall personality was, and you didn't get much deeper into those characters until generally you would reach the end of their storylines. For the 100 line, it feels like things are a little bit more in-depth. You still have very clear character traits, like you have your mechanic girl who gets queasy at the thought of violence, you have the weird twins that may or may not be a little too close to each other and really only care about one another, but still also will interact with the world around them. You've got your biker gang guy who has a heart of gold and wants to get back to the residential centers to protect people, etc., etc. Like, you have very clearly defined personalities for each of these characters, but they also will interact with each other and the world around them in a more normal, diverse way, which I do very much appreciate because it makes them much more compelling characters. Like, again, take our emo Genki girl, for example, which I know is an oxymoron, but she's an oxymoron of character. Both Jane and I, because she was watching me play the demo, were immediately rolling our eyes at this chick, right? She just reminded us of Perry from Fire Emblem Fates, like, very, like, early 2000s emo punk girl that everyone would fawn over, and she acts like that. But what makes her interesting is the fact that the more you see her interacting with people, the more you see through the facade and realize that she's just kind of a dork who throws finger guns at people and uses outdated leet speak that is clearly not going to be something that a majority of the audience for this game is even going to be familiar with. It makes her feel outdated and a little bit too much of a tryhard, and that makes her more interesting. It's not a serious depiction of a character like that. It is a satirical presentation of a character like that, and that makes it fun. Finally, there's the potential implication that each of these characters has actually come from a different residential center. While the story seems to want us to think that they've all come from the same area, it gets brought up multiple times that none of these characters have met each other before, except for the twins, who obviously grew up together, and each of them seems to have grown up in a very different environment that clashes very much with the worlds and societies that the other characters know. For example, the aforementioned twins continuously reference the idea that they've survived a lot in their lives, potentially stuff that's even worse than what the cast is going through right now in this life or death war for humanity, which completely clashes with the world that a lot of the other characters know. As another example, overly confident and potentially psychotic axe wielder Hiroko says that she's actually fought these invaders before, the implication being that it was in their residential centers. But no one has ever heard of this, and she brushes it off saying maybe it was just covered up, maybe no one cared. But when the invaders attack the residential center of our main character Takumi, it's a very obvious, very clear attack that people are very much aware of. So how is it possible that she's been fighting these things off for potentially years without anyone else in the cast knowing about it? To me, this leads to a lot of very interesting plot implications and could potentially lead to a very large humanity as a whole is fighting in these little pockets of survival to try and fend off whatever these invading beings are, while also being engaged in some greater level conspiracy to keep people from learning the dire straits that humanity is truly in, which I very much enjoy. I love that type of story, and I'm glad that that seems to be the direction that the 100 line is going in. Something that adds to this characterization for the current plot and all the playable cast is the fact that there's a ton of different cutscenes and a wealth of voice acting in the game, which I was not expecting. Again, maybe this is something that got added later on in the Danganronpa series. Maybe this is new for the studio, but there's a lot of well-animated cutscenes that really show a lot of depth of character, personality, combat, world, etc. And I was not prepared for that. Like, some people won't like this, of course, but the first real level of the game didn't start until like 10-15 minutes into me starting the demo. Prior to that, it was all well animated, well voice acted cutscenes with expressive characters and well handled actual physical animation and the like that built the world and established who these characters are. And those cutscenes continue to exist as you progress through the demo. Now, does this mean that we no longer have the very standard, like, stock character poses with variations of their profile images or like their torso up bust images or whatever as they talk back and forth, things you've seen in Danganronpa, things you've seen in Fire Emblem? Like, no, of course those still exist, but there were way more animated cutscenes here than I was expecting, and it definitely adds a lot of life to the world, especially combined with the fact that there's so much VA that goes along with it. Now, we've talked a lot here about the idea that these are still high school students, even a lot of them are like seniors, a little bit older, things like that, and the fact that they are stuck in this school, the Last Defense Academy, that also happens to be a military installation that's fighting back against these invading aliens, right? So, what does the school actually do for you as an environment? Well, it is exactly that. You're able to run around, you're able to explore, you're able to go to different facilities that allow you to do different things. It's very much a Garreg Mach or a Somniel, if you're familiar with the most recent Fire Emblem games, in that it's a place that you run around, you get to talk to the characters, interact with them, maybe do activities with them to spend time, and then also go and like explore the world map or upgrade your abilities or what have you. Thus far, I'm very neutral on the school as a whole. This is partially due to the fact that Takami's animations running around the school are very kind of cheap feeling. Like, there's no frames between you starting to move and him standing still, so you just start playing red light, green light as soon as you start to notice the weird stiltedness of the animations, and you running around the school is just an increase in animation speed. There's no different animation for actually running around, so it can feel a little disjointed at times, and you very quickly get access to fast travel. So unless you're specifically just trying to run around and find where characters are to talk with them, which you'll still be able to see on the fast travel menu anyway, you're going to spend very little time actually running around the school itself from what we've seen in the demo. So I'm a little lukewarm on this aspect. It would almost be better in my mind to just have a menu where you could go to the different facilities that you're going to be interacting with to get your upgrades and things, and then like have a menu where you can talk to characters, like a support style menu. But you know, there's going to be people who enjoy the fact that you can run around the school and see the very strange aesthetic of it that definitely tells you a little bit about the world building. So, you know, it's not a negative to me, but it's certainly not a positive either. I'm very lukewarm about it. What I'm much more excited about is the world map exploration, because that was something I was not expecting. And what's cool about this is it's actually kind of a mini game in its own right. So, what you're able to do once you get through all the initial tutorialization in the demo and everything is you can choose to actually go beyond the walls of flame that protect the school from the invading monsters most of the time, and actually explore the desolate, ruined society around you. You do this by going onto what is almost like a Mario Party style map, where every time you move, you get two different cards that give you a certain amount of spaces you will be able to move, and you can choose which one you want to use. You'll move that number of spaces, potentially having to stop and choose which direction you want to take on the map, and then you'll land on tiles. Some of them won't do anything. Other ones will involve a little exploration story segment where you have to choose whether you want to dig through these ruins or move on, and maybe you'll find an effective, powerful item or upgrade material. Maybe some rubble will fall on your head and one of your characters will lose some HP, and then you move on. Sometimes you'll find combat encounters that you have to actually go through as a normal combat style thing. Maybe sometimes you'll just find like a trove of resources you can just grab for free and be completely safe. And then oftentimes there's going to be specific objectives that you're moving towards as you do this. This is a really cool little mode. It definitely feels like it was designed as a sort of breakup of the normal moment-to-moment gameplay of the 100 line, while also giving you the opportunity to explore the world around you and have a little bit of a crafting, exploration, survival game added on top of this turn-based strategy RPG. I only got the chance to explore it once in the demo that is currently available. You might be able to go in and really focus on exploring the world map by eschewing the opportunity to use your time to like interact with the other students, but I really enjoyed that this existed, and I'm hoping that as the game goes on, you'll get more aspects to it, more and more different event tiles, maybe the ability to manipulate what movement cards you draw or how long you can survive on the map, ways to heal, etc., etc. It is really cool to be able to run around the world map and kind of have that sense of, I can only be out here for so long or my characters are going to die and not be able to get revived because we're outside the bounds of the school. But there's also a lot of materials and different things we can discover out here that are going to make the overall party stronger. That is a very nice mechanic, and I would definitely like to see it as a more fleshed out system as the game progresses. So with the overall overview and deep dive of the mechanics and story and art style and characterization of the 100 Line Last Defense Academy out of the way, what are my thoughts about it? What are my impressions of this 5-hour-long demo? Well, if you couldn't already tell, I'm extremely positive on it. The more time I spent with this demo, the more and more excited I got about it. I went in feeling fairly lukewarm. I was surprised that such a lengthy demo was dropped because I did see people talking about the length of it prior to me starting it myself. But man, I gotta say, I'm really impressed, dude. Like, every single one of these characters are very quickly growing on me in ways that I certainly did not expect. The plot seems very intriguing. The writing is actually pretty solid and feels fairly realistic to what a lot of these characters would actually be doing and saying in a roughly real-life equivalent of this scenario, because obviously it is very fantastical given current real life compared to what's going on in the game. But it's a lot easier to believe that these near-adult characters would be acting the way that they are, being thrust into a life-or-death war situation against a greater enemy, than the way the characters behave in the Danganronpa games, where they're being forced to try to kill each other for the sake of, like, entertainment of others or the survival of themselves. Like, that's always been a more out-there, silly type of scenario. That is still fun in its own right, but this feels a little bit more grounded, which helps balance out the fantastic over-the-topness that games by these devs tend to embody, right? And of course, there's going to be a lot of people that are like, why are you comparing to Danganronpa so much? It's not a Danganronpa game. It's like, yeah, obviously it's not, but incorporates so much of what those games are, and seeing as how they're really what put this studio on the map, it makes sense to compare it a little bit. Really, the biggest thing for me, though, is I was not expecting the continuing evolution of mechanics in terms of combat that the 100 Line has on offer. This whole idea of actually letting your characters get low on HP so you can sacrifice them for big bonuses in battle and swinging things in your favor. The fact that we have big boss encounters that have a lot of HP and a lot of opportunities to deal damage to you to then allow you to, in turn, sacrifice your characters for big effects. The fact that every mission thus far seems to be a defense mission. Like, I love defense missions. I'm hoping that we'll see that there's other mission types as the full game comes out. And the fact that these missions are specifically labeled as defense missions implies to me that there will be other mission types. But just the overall gameplay of we're holding the line, we're trying to prevent the enemy from getting to this point. As characters get low on HP, we can sacrifice them for the greater good because they'll be back later anyway, and get extra big bonuses, extra flashy effects. It's fun. Like, it hasn't been particularly difficult yet, but the demo only goes up to day 7 out of 100, so who knows how much more difficult things could get as we unlock more characters, unlock more abilities, and new different enemy types and objectives show up. Overall, I think it's a pretty positive indicator of the game's quality that I went from so lukewarm and skeptical to being 100% in for the rest of the game's release on April 23rd. I am so excited to see more about this game. I absolutely will be covering it here on the channel as we get any more potential news leading up to the release. Hopefully, maybe we'll see, and definitely post-release. I want to talk about these characters. I want to see what mechanics they have, what types of synergy you can get, where the plot goes. Like, I wasn't expecting to be this excited for this title, and that tells me everything I need to know about it. Now, hopefully, you are as excited as I am about the 100 Line Last Defense Academy, but if you are or are not, please do let me know in the comments and explain why you are or are not. This is definitely a departure for this studio. A lot of people are very surprised that they're making a strategy RPG, but I think it is a pretty good indicator about the renaissance of turn-based strategy and strategy RPGs. So, I mean, hey, like, why not, right? I'll take it. I will certainly take some innovation and experimentation in the genre. Really, the only big question I have at this point is why is the game only coming out on Switch and PC? It seems like a big miss to not be coming out on PS5 at the very least. It certainly seems like a game that can run on PS4 as well. And to not touch the Xbox ecosystem at all seems like a little bit of a miss. Hopefully we'll see some ports over time, the same way that we saw ports from Triangle Strategy from Switch to PC and then starting to come out on other platforms. Maybe that'll happen here as well. Let me know, I guess, if you are someone who's going to be missing out on this one initially because you are only a PlayStation or Xbox gamer. That'll be an interesting metric to see as well. With all that said, though, I'm going to start wrapping this one up here. This has gone on far longer than I expected it to, but there's a lot to talk about here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everybody. Bye now.